Ellie screamed before the dog even hit the ground. It happened so fast that for a second, she thought her mind had made it up. Some awful hallucination from lack of sleep or stress. But then Leo, her 9-year-old golden retriever mix, let out a yelp sharp enough to stop traffic. His body skidded sideways in the dirt, one paw tucked in, eyes wide with shock. Standing over him, with her HOA-issued clipboard still in hand, was Paula Wexler, board member, neighborhood enforcer, and self-proclaimed protector of aesthetic harmony. Ellie rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside Leo while Paula simply stepped back like she'd kicked a lawn chair. "You need to control that animal," Paula snapped, her voice cold, not even winded. "He charged me. He was on a leash." Ellie shot back, one hand on Leo's trembling side. "He didn't bark. He didn't jump. You walked straight at him and kicked him. He approached too quickly. That's aggressive behavior. He's a senior dog. He was wagging his tail." Paula didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She didn't even look at the dog now struggling to sit up. She turned on her heel and started back toward the sidewalk. Ellie stood slowly, heart pounding so hard she could barely hear herself think. "You're not walking away from this." Paula didn't turn around. "File a complaint if you feel the need. I'll be sure to cite your failure to secure your property line." Again, two neighbors had seen the whole thing from across the street, but when Ellie looked toward them, they quickly disappeared behind their hedges. No one wanted to get involved, not when it was Paula. The woman had been on the board for nearly 8 years. She made herself unavoidable at every meeting, every committee, every email thread that even hinted at someone breaking the HOA's growing list of unwritten rules. Everyone in Briar Glen had a Paula story. But this was different. Ellie carried Leo inside with both arms, cradling his body like a child, careful not to shift the leg he kept holding awkwardly in the air. He was nearly 50 pounds, but she didn't feel the weight. Just heat, just adrenaline, just the growing pressure in her chest that told her this wasn't over, not even close. She laid him on the couch and grabbed her phone. The first thing she did was open the front door camera app. Her heart stopped when she saw it. The footage had caught the entire confrontation, from the moment Paula stepped onto Ellie's lawn to the split second after the kick, where Leo collapsed just outside the camera's center frame. But it had also caught something else. A shadow behind Paula, halfway down the sidewalk. Someone had followed her. Ellie rewound the clip and zoomed in. The resolution wasn't perfect, but the figure was clearly visible. A teenage girl, maybe 16 or 17, dark hoodie, earbuds, clutching a phone. She hadn't intervened, but she had paused, and she had been watching the whole time. Ellie called the vet first, then she called her sister. She didn't call the HOA, not yet, because she wasn't interested in their process. She already knew what that looked like: long delays, gaslighting emails, and a smug apology if you felt upset. This wasn't going to be handled through email, not after what she saw on Leo's face. By the time they got back from the vet, bruised hip, no fracture, pain meds prescribed, there was a yellow violation slip taped to Ellie's front door. Unapproved fence planting, yard line extension. It wasn't about the fence, it was a warning. Paula was doubling down before Ellie could even begin to push back. That night, Ellie sat at the kitchen table, phone in one hand, vet invoice in the other, staring at the violation slip like it might morph into a confession. Her fingers hovered over the HOA's complaint portal. Then she stopped, because in the back of her mind, something clicked. The girl on the sidewalk, the one who watched the whole thing happen, the one who looked familiar. She opened the HOA directory, not the official one, the parent-led version that floated around on Facebook, less curated, more honest. She scrolled through house numbers, last names, and teenage children listed as babysitters or dog walkers. There she was, Rachel Wexler, 17, junior at Langdon High, Paula's daughter. Ellie stared at the name for a long moment before pulling her phone closer. She didn't want revenge. She wanted the truth on record, and someone in that house had already witnessed it. Whether Paula liked it or not, this was no longer a one-woman story, and the next time Paula tried to twist the narrative, She'd learned that even her own family didn't believe in rewriting reality. Ellie didn't storm into the next board meeting. She didn't post the footage online or drop it into the neighborhood group chat. No matter how badly she wanted to see Paula squirm in front of her little audience of clipboard-carrying loyalists, that would have been too easy, too fast, and Paula would have spun it, claimed it was edited, said it didn't show the whole story, and then buried Ellie under enough procedural paperwork to kill the momentum before it even started. So Ellie did something Paula had never planned for. She slowed down. The next morning, she started logging everything. Time-stamped photos of Leo's injuries, screenshots of the front door camera footage, every interaction she'd had with the HOA since moving in, especially the warnings Paula had left for things as minor as overgrown daisies or a garden gnome that faced the street for 2 days too long. She organized it all in a shared Google Drive and named the folder HOA, Pattern of Harassment. It wasn't about theatrics. It was about receipts. She also started asking quiet questions. She reached out to Marcy, the woman 2 blocks over whose mailbox had mysteriously been misaligned the day after she spoke up at a board meeting. Marcy still had the letter Paula left handwritten, unsigned, threatening a fine that mysteriously never appeared in the official record. Then she called Theo, the retired Army vet whose flag had been cited for unapproved pole placement. Paula had made that call herself. He still had the voicemail. Ellie asked if she could include it in her file. He didn't hesitate. People had stories, lots of them, but no one had ever bothered to put them together, until now. While the file grew thicker, Ellie also reached out to someone else, the one person who had been there that day, but hadn't said a word, Rachel Wexler. She didn't start with accusations. She sent a calm message through Instagram. Short and respectful. Hi, I think you were walking by my house last Tuesday. You might have seen what happened with my dog. If you're willing to talk, I'd really appreciate it. No pressure. Rachel didn't respond for 2 days, but when she did, it came with 3 words that made Ellie sit straight up in her chair. I saw everything. They met at the public library, near the back, where the noise from the youth reading circle masked any possibility of eavesdropping. Rachel wore a hoodie and kept her phone face down. She didn't look scared, but she looked careful, like someone who had grown up in the blast radius of a parent who treated rules like weapons. She spoke quietly, but clearly. She's been getting worse lately. It's not just you. She flips when people don't act scared of her. Ellie asked if Rachel would be willing to write a statement. Rachel hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, but I don't want to go through the HOA. They protect her. I've seen them do it. Ellie didn't argue, because Rachel was right. That night, Ellie typed up the statement exactly as Rachel had described it, then printed a copy and slid it into the folder. She didn't plan to send it anywhere yet, but now she had something the HOA couldn't refute, a neutral witness who had no reason to lie, and every reason to finally speak up. And the best part? That witness shared a last name with the aggressor. Ellie didn't stop there. She filed a formal request for the HOA's recent complaint history, anything filed by or against Paula in the past 18 months. It was public information under the Community Transparency Clause, but most residents never knew it existed. Ellie did. When the documents arrived, they painted a predictable picture. Dozens of complaints submitted by Paula, each signed off by a different board member, most of them targeting residents with small infractions, garden layouts, patio lights, lawn colors, and just 3 complaints ever filed against Paula, all dismissed within days. No explanation, no follow-up, no response. One of them even had a note scribbled on top in red pen, already resolved internally. Do not reopen. Ellie took a photo, then she highlighted it and added it to the drive, because that note wasn't resolution, it was erasure. By the end of the week, Ellie's file had grown to over 30 pages, and she still hadn't made a move. Not yet. She was waiting for one more document, for one more domino to fall. The vet had agreed to provide an official statement about Leo's injury, bruising consistent with blunt force trauma to the ribcage. No external wounds, No signs of a fall, a trained professional's words, stating plainly what Paula had tried to dismiss as theatrics. And when that report arrived, she would be ready, not just with a complaint, not just with a confrontation, but with a story so complete, so fully documented, that even the board wouldn't be able to protect Paula from what came next. Ellie didn't show up to the board meeting to make a scene, but she came prepared in case one broke out. She sat in the third row. Front and center would have looked performative, back row would have looked scared. Third row was where serious people sat. Next to her was a slim black folder, zipped shut. Inside it, 3 weeks' worth of documentation, photos, timestamps, vet records, quotes from neighbors, and Rachel's handwritten statement, signed, dated, printed on lined notebook paper. The room wasn't full, but it was fuller than usual. That's how you know something was coming. Paula stood behind the folding table with the other board members, flipping through her agenda packet like nothing had changed. She wore her usual blazer, the one with the gold pin that said Briar Glen Civic Excellence. She had used that pin like armor for years, and for a long time, it had worked. Not tonight. Ellie waded through the first 2 agenda items, yard waste disposal, sidewalk resurfacing bids. Then came community concerns, the part of the meeting where residents were allowed 2 minutes to speak. Paula gave a tight nod in Ellie's direction, as if granting her an audience. Ellie stood slowly, calm but clear. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't bring up the dog. Not yet. She started with the paperwork. This is a formal complaint about the conduct of a board member, and a request for board-level review of that person's ability to serve this community without bias or abuse of authority. She placed the folder on the table. The materials include video, a veterinary report, 5 neighbor testimonials, and a signed statement from an eyewitness. Paula raised a brow. You're referring to an incident involving your pet, correct? Ellie looked at her, really looked at her, and said, I'm referring to a pattern. The dog was just the latest example. Someone in the back coughed. Someone else shifted in their seat. A little tension leaked into the air. Paula reached for the folder, but didn't open it. You're making some pretty serious accusations. Do you have any evidence that the alleged action? There's footage. Ellie didn't let her finish. My security camera caught everything. Leo was leashed on our lawn. He wasn't barking, growling, or jumping. You walked up and kicked him so hard he yelped. I watched you do it. My vet confirmed the bruising, and your daughter watched it happen too. That last line landed like a weight. Even Paula blinked. A long stunned beat passed before anyone said anything. It was one of the younger board members, Shane, maybe 25, barely older than Rachel. You said your daughter? Ellie nodded. Rachel, she was walking behind you. She stopped. She saw the whole thing. She signed a statement. Paula shifted slightly in her chair. Not a big move, just a little weight off one foot, like she was trying to find balance and couldn't. I don't think we need to involve my family in this. You involved them the second you kicked a dog in front of your daughter. That was when the room changed. Not all at once, but enough. The tension broke open. People started whispering. Someone gasped. 2 others leaned in to reread the cover page on the folder that had been passed down the table. There was no shouting, no outrage, just quiet confirmation of something people had suspected for a long time. Paula didn't just enforce rules. She broke them when it suited her. The board tried to move on. They started the next item, like the last 5 minutes hadn't happened. But the damage was done. Nobody was listening to budget talk. All eyes were still on the folder. Paula didn't speak again that night. Not a single word. She sat stiff, eyes forward, arms crossed, like she was holding herself together 1 minute at a time. And across the room, Ellie watched her, unshaken. Not because she'd won anything, but because Paula finally knew what it felt like to sit in a room full of people who weren't afraid to see the truth. Paula didn't show up to the next HOA meeting. She claimed she had the flu, but nobody believed that. Not after Ellie's folder had been passed around like a hot coal, and her daughter's name was read aloud, right there in front of everyone. For years Paula had walked through this neighborhood, like she owned it, like every crack in the sidewalk needed her blessing to exist. But now, that power was slipping, and it wasn't because of Ellie, it was because of Rachel. It started with a post, nothing dramatic, just a quiet update from Rachel on her private Instagram story, a blurry shot of Leo, tail wagging, curled on Ellie's front steps. Underneath, just one line, still recovering, but he's okay. Sorry it took me this long. No names, no accusations, but people in the neighborhood saw it, and they knew exactly what it meant. Later that night, Ellie opened her front door to find a small envelope taped to the railing. Inside was a folded sheet of notebook paper with Rachel's handwriting at the top. This time, the statement wasn't just a paragraph, it was 2 full pages, front and back. She had written about the walk, about the moment Paula kicked Leo, about how she hesitated, not because she didn't care, but because she had spent years watching her mom do things that made her stomach twist, things that never got questioned, because no one wanted to be the first one to say it out loud. Rachel ended the letter with one sentence, "I'm not protecting her anymore." The next morning, the statement was on the board president's desk, and within 24 hours, everything started unraveling. First came the call from the Community Mediation Council, a third-party organization the HOA rarely used, only when things got bad enough that the board couldn't clean it up themselves. A formal review was requested, and Paula's name was placed at the top of the list for conduct investigation. Then came the emails from homeowners, not anonymous ones, not angry rants, real names, real addresses, residents asking how many of their past citations had been issued directly by Paula, asking why previous complaints were ignored, asking if anything was going to be done now that someone had finally stood up. And once the questions started, they didn't stop. The board scrambled. They held an emergency session to discuss member accountability protocols. Ellie didn't go. She didn't have to. The room was full of people who had once whispered their frustrations to each other in driveways and grocery store aisles. Now they were quoting the bylaws out loud. Now they were reading Rachel's statement. Now they were saying Paula's name in the same sentences as abuse of power and board misconduct. Someone dug up a violation Paula had issued to a family who left Halloween decorations up past November 5th. Someone else found her note threatening a citation over a child's sidewalk chalk art being non-conforming visual clutter. By the end of the week, an entire thread had formed in the neighborhood group. Things Paula got away with. The screenshots were brutal, but the comments were worse, because they weren't mocking, they were regretful. People weren't just angry. They were embarrassed they'd let her act like this for so long. The tipping point came at the board's mid-month meeting. Paula didn't show up for that one either. This time, she didn't even send an excuse. Alan, the vice president, opened the floor to a motion for temporary removal pending investigation. And to everyone's surprise, it wasn't a board member who raised their hand first. It was Rachel. She sat in the back, quiet but certain, and stood up when Alan asked for comments from the community. She didn't cry, she didn't rant, she just said, "You all know what she did. I saw it. You saw the video. What happens next tells us what kind of neighborhood we actually are." There wasn't a single person who looked away, and that night, the vote passed. Unanimous. Paula Wexler was suspended indefinitely from the Briar Glen HOA board. When the news broke, there was no cheering, no parties, just a quiet shift in the air, like the neighborhood had finally let out a breath it didn't know it had been holding. For Ellie, it wasn't about the board vote. It was about the fact that the person who tried to act like she was above every rule finally got held to the same standards as the rest of them, and not by a stranger, by her own daughter. The silence after Paula's suspension was louder than any argument that could have followed. There was no official announcement from her, no Facebook post trying to explain it away, no last-ditch effort to clear her name. For a woman who had built her identity around control, she disappeared almost overnight. The very next week, her name was removed from the HOA board list on the community bulletin. It didn't take long for people to notice she was gone. But what caught everyone off guard was how quickly the mood in the neighborhood started to shift. For years, residents had gotten used to bracing themselves, checking their bushes before putting up decorations, rereading the guidelines before repainting anything, even second-guessing where they placed their garbage bins. It wasn't that the rules were always unfair. It was how Paula enforced them, with an edge, with personal judgment, and with an unspoken dare. Go ahead, challenge me. Now that edge was gone, and people could feel it. Ellie didn't expect anything to change for her personally. She didn't need an apology from the board. She didn't expect one from Paula. Her only goal had been to stop the pattern, because what happened to Leo could have happened to someone else's dog, or worse, to someone's kid. But what she hadn't anticipated was the ripple effect. A week after the board voted on Paula's suspension, Ellie received a hand-addressed letter, not from the HOA, from Janice Morales, a homeowner on the other end of the neighborhood who Ellie had never met. Janice had written 2 pages. She described how Paula had once threatened to fine her family for planting sunflowers too close to the curb. She wrote about how her husband's permit for a wheelchair ramp took 6 months longer than it should have, because certain members of the board claimed it didn't fit the community's visual standard. And at the very end of the letter, she wrote, "What you did, it gave us back our voice. Thank you for reminding everyone that we don't have to take this quietly." Ellie read that line twice. She placed the letter in the same folder where she kept the complaint documents, but this time, she wasn't saving it as evidence. She was saving it as a reminder. The board, to their credit, didn't sweep anything under the rug. They formed a temporary committee to review past violations, especially ones where Paula had been the sole author. In one case, a $400 landscaping fine was refunded. In another, a family was offered an apology after being accused of violating fence height restrictions that were, in fact, not in the rules at all. Some of these residents didn't even know they had the right to appeal until Ellie's case broke open the cracks. People were no longer afraid to ask questions, and that alone was a shift. At the next open forum, the tone was completely different. Gone were the sarcastic comments and tight-lipped nods. Instead, people brought printed notes. A man named Walter even showed up with a binder of emails he'd kept since 2018, not because he was angry, because he finally believed someone would listen, and they did. The meeting ran over by nearly an hour, but no one complained. Not even once. Rachel stayed out of the spotlight. She never spoke publicly again about what happened, but she didn't avoid Ellie either. On her way home from school one afternoon, she walked up to the house, gently scratched Leo behind the ears, and handed Ellie a folded note. No words exchanged. Inside the note was a photograph, taken from Rachel's phone. A soft, candid shot of Leo, resting in the sun near the porch, head tilted, eyes calm. Underneath it, she'd written, "I know it doesn't fix anything, but he looked peaceful." Ellie placed it on the fridge, next to Rachel's first statement, not because she needed closure, but because she understood what Rachel had given her. Not just a photo, but a choice to be honest, a choice to stop pretending silence was safer. And maybe that was the real fallout, not the vote, not the suspension. It was the people who had once stood by, realizing they didn't have to anymore. It was neighbors stepping into their front yards without scanning the street for a clipboard. It was someone like Rachel, speaking up for the first time, and showing that even the ones closest to the problem still had a choice to break away from it. It wasn't a headline or a public apology that marked the end of it. It was a quiet Saturday morning, just like any other. Ellie was sipping coffee on the porch, Leo stretched out in his usual sun patch, finally looking like his old self again. His fur was growing back over the bruise, the limp had mostly faded, and his tail, always the last to forgive, was wagging again. That was how she knew they were okay. Not healed, maybe, but no longer hurting. The neighborhood had changed in small, almost imperceptible ways. People waved more,
They stopped on walks to talk, not just nod and pass by. The kind of interactions that used to happen before everyone got so careful, before every flower pot and light bulb felt like an offense waiting to be cited. Ellie noticed it most on Thursdays. That was trash day, the day Paula used to drive around with her clipboard and camera phone, noting who left their bins out 10 minutes early. Now the bins still lined the curb, but no one looked over their shoulder while putting them there. Rachel came by once more before school let out for the summer. She didn't knock, just dropped something off, an envelope, taped to the front gate. Inside was a small thank you card, with a pressed daisy inside. No note, just her name. Ellie placed it inside the same folder she had once filled with violation slips and witness statements, not because she needed to keep the evidence anymore, but because it reminded her how people grow when given the chance to choose differently. And Rachel had chosen exactly that. The board elections came and went. New faces, new names. Ellie didn't run. She didn't want a title. But when the new board president asked her to review the updated code of conduct before it was finalized, she agreed without hesitation. She read every line, made a few notes, crossed out a section that gave board members discretionary authority over unlisted violations. They removed it, and no one fought her on it. When fall came, Leo was back to chasing squirrels, never catching them, never really trying to, just happy to run again, without fear. Ellie found herself walking with neighbors more often. One day it was Marcy, who had been fined for a wreath once. Another day it was Theo, the vet with the flag complaint. Each of them had their own stories, their own lines in the history of a neighborhood that had once gotten used to staying quiet, but none of them stayed quiet anymore. Ellie didn't need to be a hero. She just needed to know the next time someone got cornered, they wouldn't have to stand there alone. That was enough, because sometimes the best kind of justice isn't loud. It's a leash with no tension. It's a dog lying in the sun, unbothered, and a neighborhood finally learning that silence doesn't keep the peace, it only buries it.